Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a Neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? This marks a significant departure from my usual routine of pre-recorded interviews. Today, I'm taking the plunge into live streaming. Rest assured, this episode will make its way into my regular podcasts. Welcome, everyone. Today, we embark on another first as we delve into a critical topic with some of the key figures involved in the creation and implementation of the bBrave bullying and autism in the workplace study. Let me provide a bit of context. I first discovered bBrave and their groundbreaking study at the Diversity Inclusion Conference hosted by Betson Group, where I was honored to be one of the keynote speakers focusing on neurodiversity in the workplace. It was there that I had the opportunity to connect with Aaron and Greta of bBrave, and it's at that moment I felt compelled to be part of the study, both professionally and personally. This study in itself is a groundbreaking initiative, the first of its kind in Malta, shining a light into the shadow of the workplace dynamics. The findings will reveal the profound impact that both bullying and autism have on employees, neurodivergence, people with disabilities, and ultimately on a company's bottom line. To guide us through this insightful conversation, I'm thrilled to be joined by Aaron Zammit of bBrave, Gertrude of the Commission of Mental Health, Jessica Borg of the Commission of Rights of Persons with Disability, also known as CRPD, and Jackie Attard Montalto of Chief Human Resources Director at Atlas Insurance. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, glad to be here.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, thanks, Joseph, for this invitation.
Well, thank you all for being here. So some ground rules. I have about 10 questions or so, and I really want to get to all 10 of them and to stick to our 1 hour time frame. So I'll be putting a bit of a timer. Good luck, and this includes me too. So let's kick off our discussion by hearing each of your perspectives on the groundbreaking study. And Aaron, I'd like to begin with you. But before we dive into your insights, could you provide our audience with a brief overview of bBrave? Help us understand the organization behind this vital study.
Thanks, Joseph, for the opportunity to put some, flesh out a bit our work that we carried out mostly over last year. bBrave was born 7 years ago. We had our anniversary last year, and the intention was always to create this movement, this awareness, and trying to help people in the ambit of bullying. We realized that there was no other NGO working in this field. We were surprised and shocked because bullying has been with us since ever, and bullying happens all around us. And we said we need to set this up, and that is why bBrave was born, with its mission statement focused on awareness and support. However, from the very beginning, being the only volunteer organization working in anti-bullying, we said, listen, we need to focus on all forms of bullying. Most people think of bullying within schools, between children, when they think of bullying, but we see bullying in a much wider sense, including bullying online, but also bullying at the workplace and between adults. And that is what stimulated our biggest project yet, which came to fruition last year, about bullying and ostracism at the workplace in Malta. And basically the main pillars of this project was, firstly, we carried out the study, which I think we will be discussing in more detail later today, where we took a snapshot, because we talk a lot about it. We do talk to people out there, people who are going through it, people who observe it. So we do have a good feeling about it, but we didn't know how deep this problem was, how ingrained. We didn't know facts and figures. We didn't know whether there was differences between male and female, with persons with disability, persons in other vulnerable categories. So we said, let's first understand the extent and the nature of the problem. Once we had the data in hand, and we eventually developed and produced our report, we developed a toolkit So we came up with template anti-bullying policy, template training materials for management and for employees. We actually went on to deliver a number of these workshops ourselves. And finally, we held an awareness campaign and a stakeholders conference at the end of the project last year.
Thank you. And what were your initial thoughts out of the study?
You know, it's surprising how we were still shocked by the findings, because we do talk to people every day and we do know that there are serious problems out there. But to receive I would call 3 main statistics from the study, there are lots of figures that you can look at. 64% of the working population claimed that there is bullying at the workplace last year. 40% of people who work in Malta claim that they were bullied or have been bullied or are being bullied over last year. And 9% of those 40% actually claim that they have either attempted or had thoughts about suicide and self-harm. So these are very, very worrying statistics, far-reaching implications, not only on health and mental health, because there's also physical health repercussions, even though we're not talking about most of the time physical bullying when we're talking about workplace bullying, but there's also a lot of, there's a huge impact on society, on relationships and social effects, but also economic effects. And we've even seen there is a rough calculation of an impact of bullying on 4% of GDP of our country. So when we're looking at this, we really do look at it holistically, and we see the huge impact that bullying has on workers in Malta.
Perfect. And Jessica, let's follow up with you, because the 3 of us were on the committee and are part of the committee in regards to forming this study. So let's get your internal thoughts before we move on to Jackie and Gertrude.
One of the one of the key results was that also 55% of persons with disability have claimed bullying at the workplace. This is also very shocking, and therefore we have to make something, and we have to actually raise awareness when it comes to people with disability, because they are seen as a target group, a vulnerable target group. And this affects their engagement and retention in employment. So yes, we do have to raise awareness more on this, and also encourage not only people with disability, but all people to actually have to first raise awareness on what is bullying, because there is a lot of misinterpretations on the definition of what bullying is. However, then we also have to let them know that there is support, and that if you report a case of bullying, there obviously there are not going to be a lot of repercussions. So it's your right to report bullying, and even we have to raise awareness that if you witness bullying, there is certain support that the witness can provide to the individual who is being bullied.
Perfect, thank you. So let's come to you, Gertrude and Jackie, and start with you, Gertrude. From what you've heard expressed from Aaron and Jessica in regards to the stats, what were your initial thoughts and building upon what they said?
So basically, as the officer of the Commissioner for Mental Health, when we were approached to support this project, it was a straight yes, because even before embarking on the study, from our data, we were aware of the impact of bullying across all ages on mental health. We know of cases where childhood bullying kept affecting the mental health of a person in their adult life, let alone persons who are experiencing bullying on an ongoing way at their workplace. So really now, what bBrave did with this study was literally putting the numbers on a problem which we were aware of, but couldn't quantify. So this is very valid information from a planning perspective and from a commissioner perspective with regards to making recommendations on a mental health perspective, not just bullying, but obviously now we have the evidence in hand. And obviously, I'm very happy to have been part of this beautiful study and look forward to work further with bBrave and its brave team.
Thank you. And that's really interesting what you said there, that you've had a greater understanding, but now you have the numbers to quantify that and start initiating particular plans and strategies on how to tackle this. And with that said, we now come to you, Jackie, from a human resources and employer perspective. Hearing what Gertrude had just said, having these quantified numbers, what were your impressions and building on what she has said?
Hi, I'm here on behalf of the company. Obviously, I work for Atlas Insurance, but also as a member of the presidency team of the Malta Employees Association. So obviously, looking at it from a very business point of view, I really tap into what Gertrude is saying, because as we all know, business people relate to numbers, and that's the first thing that people tend to latch onto. So yes, I'm extremely grateful that this study exists. However, I really have to say, I find it quite distressing to talk about bullying in the context of numbers and figures and finances, because it's a very human issue. And I think what we have to remember as employers is to put the human first, and then economic impacts can be looked at, but I think they're quite secondary, and I think we really have to keep this in mind. So obviously, when you look at figures, you mentioned 4% of GDP. When we look at studies, a study from the US puts the cost of a bullying case that goes to litigation, even just to deal with it internally, between $30,000 and $100,000 US. And that's an old study. Studies from the UK are citing just internally dealing with it can be up to £30,000. So we're talking big money here. However, again, let's remember that the first thing we have to look at is the human aspect.
Absolutely, 100%. And the human aspect is definitely of a great concern, particularly when we went through the study. And before we move on to that, I want to come back to you, Aaron, because Jessica brought up an interesting perspective and points. So let's bring a little bit of a clarification in that point, which is, what is the definition of bullying? Because it is a little bit of a debate of what that definition is. So based on the study and based on what bBrave has found, what is that definition?
Okay, that's usually a tough one to answer, because the bullying is all pervading. It goes into domestic violence, it goes into abuse with children, with online, with verbal, physical, psychological, manipulative behavior. However, the way we have sort of condensed it is that we define it as a situation where you have two or more people. There is an imbalance of power. Now, the imbalance of power by itself doesn't mean there's any abuse, but it's the abuse of that imbalance which then leads to bullying. And for bullying to subsist, there has to be an element of repetition. So we have the abuse of the imbalance of power on a repeated basis. Now, if you look at it like that, I think it's easier to understand, but then you start realizing how wide bullying is. And if you you could, sometimes I observe it outside in the roads and driving, even if someone just has a meaner car or has a bit of an attitude, you can start saying, that person is going around all day on our roads with that attitude. That's quite a, that's a real bullish attitude there. I wonder whether, that could be bullying as well. So sometimes it's a bit of a gray area whether you can classify bullying, certain behavior as bullying or not, but in other cases, it very clearly is. However, I would emphasize that it's very important to also understand what bullying is not. So in the context of bullying at the workplace, legitimate disciplinary proceedings, for example, is not bullying. If someone's attention is being brought because their work is not up to standard, up to quality, not meeting the desired level of whatever standard at the workplace, that's okay. Because at the end of the day, it is management's responsibility of making sure that things get done and they get done properly. It is many times the way in which that is done which can be abusive. So there are ways and ways of talking to people. If you need to address someone, if you need to discipline them, you don't need to do it in front of the whole room, for instance, if you need to show certain frustrations. And that is, in many cases, that is a game that is played, that this power play, which I mentioned in the beginning when defining bullying. And I have to say that one of the other shocking figures from the study is that 88% of workplace bullying takes place in front of others. And why is this shocking? It's shocking because it shows how much of a bullying culture we have in Malta. That the person who is carrying out bullying doesn't even care that others are seeing him or her. They do it in front of others because it's an accepted behavior. So we did, in the study, when people were answering the quantitative part of the study, when they were filling in the online survey, we did explain what bullying is. There is always the risk when people are answering surveys that there is a bias in terms of what people, irrespective of how you define a term, of what they believe to be bullying. But that, I think, is an element in all scientific research. There's always an element of bias by respondents, especially when you're going out to the public. However, I think it's pretty damning, if I can say.
I completely agree, and you really give a clear definition: an imbalance of power and being repetitive, and as well as the fact that that imbalance of power is showing their dominance, not only to the person they're bullying, but towards the whole entire people that they're displaying that dominance to. And that's what we're seeing in regards to this culture of bullying. So let's move on to the next question, because this really leads on into that atmosphere. And thank you for that definition, Aaron. Within our study committee, should I say, a point of considerable debate arose from the findings. Is Malta inherently an aggressive society? Coming back to your point, Aaron. To provide some context, I've engaged in similar discussions with fellow immigrants to Malta, and collectively, we've observed a shared experience of heightened aggression since our arrival. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this matter. And let me give you some additional information here. In relation to the aggression, let's look at the study. 38% of participants who experienced bullying started this first occurring within the first 6 months of employment. What does that say about the aggression and how employees are treated, how should I say employers or managers treat new staff? 20% of participants who experienced bullying responded that this takes place on a daily basis, and 27% expressed that this happens on a weekly basis. Jackie, let's start with you on this one. Jackie, you're muted.
I'm muted. I think on this one, I should really defer to others, because I don't have a lot of experience related to, whether we're an aggressive culture or not. So maybe people more involved in the study and in the mental health arena could shed some more light on this.
Sure. Gertrude, how about we come to you then?
Well, I mean, aggression is not just something which we can have a sweeping statement and say that we are all aggressive. We know that as Mediterraneans, we tend to be a bit hyped up. And obviously, then there are the stressors which happen around us, which may at times result in people snapping much faster than others. Then there is also the sort of like the macho mentality as well. The louder you shout, the more you get your point across. So I think there are loads of elements which can be transcribed into aggression, but which lead to a certain way of behaving. Now, when you are dealing with people within the same culture, they may discount that and say, yes, it's fine, it's because we're Maltese. But whereas when we're dealing with people from other cultures, they think that they are being shouted at, and that creates a misunderstanding, I'd say. Obviously, it is not acceptable that people shout at each other, that I snap at you because I've had a bad day at work. However, it depending on, as Aaron was saying, this issue of bullying, how frequent that happens, or if I find every excuse to snap at you because you are the foreigner at the workplace, or I am the only Maltese at the workplace surrounded by foreigners, and I want to make my point that this is my country and I rule, then that is very dangerous, and that is not definitely acceptable from a humane perspective, but also from a mental health perspective, because if we are to work together, we need to respect one another, and there are various ways of ensuring that you work with your peers without being aggressive and without bullying.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because from a cultural perspective, and I'll throw in a little bit of a personal story. When my wife, then girlfriend, and I were starting to date, she was quite shocked at the communication between my parents and when they were speaking Maltese. She always saw it as that they were constantly fighting. You know, versus my girlfriend, well, now wife, is Polish, and the Polish language is a very soft language in comparison to the Maltese language. So I get that perspective, but there's still a level of aggression, and that's something that we were debating about and finding in the study. Jessica, let's get your point and perspective on this.
Yes, so I completely agree with Gertrude that in Malta we do tend to have this even the tone of voice that we use when debating, you can say, is quite high. For when it comes to persons with disability, something which I would like to mention is that I see it that sometimes they can kind of experience like bullying in an aggressive way, because normally, like, since they are more on the vulnerable side of group, here in Malta, as everyone knows, there was this very much taboo when it comes to disability, and a lot of people with disability were either hidden in the basements and hidden away from society. So now the fact that they are now out in society, in an inclusive society, people say, like, they start saying, for example, bad, like, oh, you shouldn't be here, you know. So that is a form of bullying, and it's also a form of aggression. Like, they feel that persons with disability end up excluded from society due to terminology which are used. However, obviously, that's what CRPD, one of its dreams is to raise awareness on disability and on inclusion of persons with disability, especially in the workplace, and also terminology which is acceptable and which is not acceptable, because even how you refer to a person can show that, for example, it kind of has an aggressive side to it, because, like, if you, for example, say, he is a handicapped person, we do not say that any longer. It's not not correct terminology. We say it's a person with disability. So even we are trying to raise awareness so that people with disability feel more included in society. So
you brought up some very interesting points, which I want to touch upon later on. But you pointed out some points in coming out from the focus group, where some of the people in that focus group have experienced being told that they shouldn't belong here and they should be in an institution. So going on to that, then, I want to come back to you, Gertrude. As we delve into the various forms of bullying, including fear-mongering, threats, isolation, and humiliation, could you shed some light on the mental and physical impact these experiences have on the victims?
Definitely. When people are constantly being pushed to the side, they tend to develop issues such as depression due to the loneliness, anxiety, because if every time you think that you're going to work, you're going to be picked up on, you become anxious. And some people even decide to leave their place of work because it gets too much. Then there is also the double vulnerability of persons with mental health problem, where they are not believed of the suffering that they are going through, linked to the stigma. So we have the stigma of bullying, we have the stigma of mental health, stigma of disability. So everything becomes so compounded that sometimes life gets too difficult for the person to face. And it's not a matter of you understand or you accept that you have a mental health problem and you go and access services at your mental health professional. They can give you medication, you can go to therapy. But if every time you think about going to work, that's gonna trigger your anxiety and your depression, first you have to sort the source of your difficulty. So the problem, okay, it is with you, but if it's being created by somebody else, action has to happen outside. It's useless fixing myself or stuffing myself with medication, and then others are making me worse every moment I walk in the workplace. So yeah, the mental health component is a serious aspect in all this.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because when we take a look, and just to add some further stats, we're looking at 80% of bullying is psychological and emotional, 58% is verbal, 47% is exclusion. And then we look at PTSD, CPTSD, flashbacks, trust issues, insomnia. Let's come to you, Jackie, because when we take a look at some of the stats here, we see 48% intentionally decrease their work effort, 47% intentionally decrease their time spent at work, 63% lost work time in an effort to avoid their offender, should I say. So let's touch upon that before we go further.
Sure. I think, yes, definitely one of the main issues that is of concern, apart from trying to mitigate the situation for the person who's being bullied and addressing both the bully and the person who's been bullied, because obviously both of them have issues which need to be addressed, because, whilst one is the victim, the other one is the person who has been carrying out this kind of behavior, But one very interesting quote I came across, from a Canadian expert on bullying, said, "You may as well be turning up to work drunk." The effects of the anxiety and the depression and the trauma caused, and what would we be doing to employees who turn up at work drunk, and how would we be perceiving their performance? I mean, there's absenteeism, turnover, low productivity, management time spent, in trying to address these issues, litigation, counseling, so many things, health costs. We all know mental health definitely long-term has an effect on physical health, muscular, skeletal problems, you can't exercise, cardiovascular, major one, So definitely in the workplace. And apart from all this, people within the same work units seeing what's going on, the demoralization that happens, it is a really multifaceted, complex environment. And again, when you throw in neurodivergence, mental health of both the perpetrator and the victim, I think they're extremely far-reaching, and definitely from not only the human view, the economic point of view, worth going into and trying to create further understanding and training of how to help people in HR to better deal with these situations. And I think something maybe I can touch on here, and maybe we'll go into it later, is the role of leadership, the organization's leadership in this. I don't know if you want me to go into it now or maybe later on, Joseph.
Let's maybe come back to that. Let's put
Okay.
a pigeonhole in that, because that's something I would like to talk about. But let's continue on with you, Jackie. And this is really interesting because this study has brought up a particular thing. And I want to relate this to an article that I read recently. So I recently came across an article from the UK discussing school children's absenteeism due to anxiety, attributing to a lack of support and structural issues within the school. The article suggested viewing anxiety as a sign linking it to canaries in a coal mine. This resonates, as I said earlier, with the findings from the bBrave study, revealing that 42% of workers exhibit symptoms of stress and anxiety. Nearly half report various levels of depression symptoms, and 1 in 4 may require professional help. Would you agree that these are clear signals akin to canaries in a coal mine within the workplace? And more importantly, how should we address this, taking into consideration the impact of the cost of absenteeism, presenteeism, and turnover?
I think, again, it comes back to company culture. I think one of the most important things is that part of the management role is to be looking out, for the staff who are in your department, to pick up on these signals. Not every case of anxiety or depression is related to bullying, but definitely to look at each case where you see somebody not performing, taking a lot of sick leave, especially where, you had previous indication that the person was performing well, where you start to see a changing situation, and these are all big alarm bells for us, and the first thing we should do as management, as HR, is work together to try to see what the cause of these changes are. And how we can address them. There are many ways, so sometimes you have managers who are close to their department, they can speak to them themselves and they could be good at this. Other ways are to refer to a professional. There are today employee assistance programs. There are ones that can be, companies can join. So I think that's very important. And these generally have 24/7 helplines. And people can call and speak to professionals, because I think, whilst I said, management and HR can be helpful, I think there's nothing like speaking to a professional who has actually been trained for many years and warranted to be able to deal with these issues, And some people aren't ready to open up within the workplace. They need someone outside to be able to talk to. It's very humiliating, we all know this, that the reality is that there are so many aspects to it. If I'm going to speak up, what will my manager think of me? People will think I'm a failure. Then there'll be the repercussions of, if I report someone, how will that person treat me? Will the bullying get worse? So there's all this, and again, we have to treat it very delicately. So sometimes people would want to speak to someone outside the organization, whatever the cause of the anxiety is. It could be bullying, it could be something else completely, But I think it's not always easy for people to open up when they're suffering from mental health issues, which is, again, a pity, a sign of further education for us all, I think.
Well, that's really interesting, and I want to continue on this before we go to the next scheduled question. And I want to come to you, Aaron. But before we come to Aaron, I want to kind of build this up a little bit. We have seen during COVID a huge focus finally put onto mental health. But I knew from the get-go that the mental health was focused on the issue of COVID. And as soon as COVID became normalized, we started to see that mental health focus diminish. And now we're seeing this bBrave study come into place. And we're seeing, again, we're seeing these signs, and as you agreed, that these are definitely signs to watch out for as being canaries in the coal mine. So with that said, Aaron, I come to you then. From a legal perspective now, when we're starting to see these signs, and someone is basically suffering because of the dominance that's being put upon them, this imbalance of power, what are the legal implications towards a company and the safeguards per se for that victim?
Okay, so that's quite a loaded question, because every bullying case is not like the other,
Fair.
right? So there isn't a one answer which fits all the problems. However, taking it from the perspective of the organization, definitely there is a reputational risk, particularly in a country like ours where everyone is connected, people talk. I think if there is a toxic environment in a particular workplace, people will talk, and everyone will get to know about it. So that's one big, I think, risk for a workplace that does not take care of the well-being of its employees. Secondly is, I think, that the employer should not ignore that it has legal obligations to provide for the well-being of its employees. Now, certain things you can put your finger on very clearly, others can be a bit vague. However, generally, if there is consistent, for example, abuse at the workplace, and perhaps it's being reported, and HR or management is either ignoring it or is pretending to take care of it, but not really doing much, or whatever it's doing, it's obvious that it's ineffective. It's just putting it on the sides, doing something, just brushing the surface. I think that when there are repercussions there, the company could be sued. So then if the company is in court, there's further reputational damage that could arise. There's obviously, I would say, apart from the direct legal consequences for the company, I would say reputation and the loss of quality of work and people leaving the company needing to be replaced is a much bigger concern, direct concern for the companies. We know how difficult it is to find the right people for a particular job. We know that unhappy people, and this came out from the study as well, perform less. They do less work, they do less quality work, and if they are really fed up, they leave. Okay, and now if the good person leaves, the toxic person stays. So the toxicity continues with other persons, so other people will leave. And sometimes it's infectious. Once one person leaves, the next one starts, being braver in that sense, into considering whether they should leave as well. So where does that leave the employer? The employer is left with the continuation of the toxic environment, of course, which is a vicious circle. The experience that now that team has less staff that have to do the same amount of work. Probably they have to pay overtime to make up for the extra hours. Then there will be fatigue with the rest of the team being tired because they're doing more than they usually do. So even the quality of their work starts diminishing. There are expenses to advertise for vacant positions. There are recruitment costs, and there are training costs, and there is a learning curve. So until the next person is found and trained and is brought up to the standards that is usually expected, again, that is a huge cost for the company. So what we like to say to employers is that it is far, far cheaper to implement anti-bullying practices within an organization. And that is why we came up with our own template anti-bullying policy, which we estimate to cost a company around €5,000 if they had to develop it themselves. We're giving it to them for free. It's on our website, it's in English, it's in Maltese, they can just download it. Perfect. Obviously, we encourage one to adapt it, and obviously to implement it effectively. We're not, we're not encouraging people to just have the policy there and then forget about it. There have to be effective procedures implemented within the organizations where an actual culture of anti-bullying is promoted.
That's perfect. And you took the words out of my mouth, because you spoke earlier about that once someone leaves, that gives the indication of the culture, either culture of that people need to leave to avoid this culture of bullying, or it further amplifies that this is an acceptable culture and behavior within an organization to bully others. And continuing on with that theme, when you take on this toolkit, these policies, the paperwork is done for you, but the integration of changing that culture isn't done for you. That work has to be done by the corporation, by the leadership team, to incorporate that aspect. And I think this is a good time to come back to you, Jackie, actually, because you mentioned earlier, and I did put a pigeonhole into it, in regards getting leadership on board. And this is a perfect segue to come back to this. Can you speak about that?
Sure. I think in any societal unit, the leader makes or breaks, right? So if we have toxic leaders, we have a toxic culture. So I think, even when people are choosing a workplace, looking to see what the leadership is like is also very important. What kind of image does the company have out there? We mentioned macho environments before. We look at what kind of workplace environment the leader, CEO, and the CEO's leadership team are fostering. Is it a punitive culture? Is it a mocking culture? Or is it a learning culture and a forward-looking culture, a kind culture where people are taken care of? If there are issues, they're kindly and constructively brought up and addressed, and people are helped to get over whatever issues are coming up. And I think, if you can see that a company's leadership culture is kind, then everything else follows. And I always say that, I even talk about this in sales, I mean, we try not to foster environments anymore when we have these toxic sales targets and, people are in or out, or, salaries are made or broken over targets. I think, when people are happy, they want to do their best, and then we don't have to think so much of targets, because they're reached on their own, because people are happy and they perform and they're excited to grow and learn. So I think, for me, this is what makes a big difference. And I want to stress here that I'm not discarding success, budgets, finances. I'm really not. But I sincerely believe that it's almost secondary. When you deal with people in the right way, people want to do well. It happens naturally.
Perfect. And I completely agree with you wholeheartedly on that. So now we've given a very general perspective in regards to what we have found in the study overall. I now want to narrow down the focus towards neurodiversity and people with disabilities. And this brings the next question to you, Jessica. Given our shared background in similar fields, I found the bBrave study's findings on neurodiversity and people with disabilities to be quite daunting. The report highlights a concerning statistics. Individuals with disabilities have a higher likelihood of being bullied, with 42% seeking support. I'm curious to hear your reflection on this aspect from a CRPD perspective, on how frequently do you encounter complaints of this nature, especially considering that 51% of individuals have reported instances of bullying, whether internally or externally. And to further add to that, 23% of persons with disability feel that they may be next, and 56% of disability have experienced bullying in the last year.
Yes, so within CRPD, one can in fact find our investigations unit where day after day they receive complaints from persons with disability who feel discriminated on the basis of their disability. Touching up on the discussion that we had on COVID, I would like to mention that in 2020, CRPD have received 24 cases related to employment discrimination. 4% of these complaints were related to bullying. So here we can see that as 4%, it is quite a low rate. However, contrastingly, in 2021, CRPD have received 23 cases on employment, showing 30% of these cases being related to bullying. So we can see that when people have reported back to work after the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been an increase of cases which resulted in bullying at the workplace. And normally, so CRPD's main role in this, so when a person issues a complaint, is that of a mediator. So the individual comes to CRPD stating, listen, I have been discriminated at the workplace due to my disability for an issue. The first thing that CRPD does is they recommend that the individual first speaks to their employer. If nothing has no change has been done, then CRPD starts looping in and starts investigating the case. CRPD, again, as I stated, is normally a mediator. So they first understand and see both sides. So both the side of the employer and the individual. And then they start delving into further as to what happened and what the employer has done. Then recommendations are set out by CRPD and actions which are needed to be taken upon. It is important that obviously the employer needs to take action. And normally the recommendations which our investigations unit provides is either suggesting that the company does disability equality training, which is training offered by CRPD itself, where this training is a training given to both public and private organizations on disability etiquette, the do's and don'ts on disability, different types of disability, and reasonable accommodation, which can help a person with disability. Now, it's important that obviously we take into consideration all types of disability, being it physical, hidden, neurodivergent, hearing impairment, visual impairment, and obviously all the recommendations tied to it. Another recommendation which they suggest is that of creating an internal policy on anti-bullying, so that obviously there is more awareness among the employees working in that environment. And then obviously they see any other recommendations or actions depending on the situation of the nature of the company, what is needed to obviously decrease the bullying environment, so that obviously a person with disability feels more included. Something which I would like to mention is that CRPD up to now never took up cases related to employment and bullying up to court. However, there have been instances that individuals go up to court, obviously on a case on employment and bullying, and then CRPD are asked to be witnesses in this case. Sometimes, however, I need to mention this, that sometimes there are people who reach out to CRPD, however, they are scared of the next steps as to what might happen. And therefore, they ask CRPD, like, listen, please do not investigate this case because I'm scared of the repercussions that might follow. And the repercussions normally are that of losing the job, or the bullying becomes further and it comes out of hand. And in a way, I kind of understand a person, this perspective from a person with disability, because it's very challenging for them to find a job which is suitable for them and a job which accepts them and their needs. Because as you know, here in Malta, it's quite a challenge for persons with disability to find a job related to their skills and needs. And sometimes a person with disability launches a complaint. However, then with internal discussions with CRPD, they notice that their complaint was not, that their case was not related to bullying. So there is a lot of different perceptions of bullying, and that's why I think it's of utmost importance that we raise awareness on the definition of bullying. Because, like, for example, a person with disability would think that they are being bullied, but then in actual fact, they wouldn't be.
I think in that case, there's a couple of things that I want to break down a little bit, Jessica. One of the last point that you brought up is it bullying or is it discrimination because of the person's disability? And what's the employer or the courts may not see as being bullying may actually well be discrimination. And how do we address that? And a lot of the points that we've brought up prior to this point of discussion has indicated the cost towards companies. And part of that cost is not being inclusive. So as Aaron had said earlier, it's far cheaper to invest in inclusion, in training of your staff and managers to include neurodivergence and people with disabilities versus the costs of legal implications. And there was another point that you had mentioned, which I want to come back later, which is the difficulty of finding employment. And I have a question for that, but I want to come back to that. So we'll put a pigeonhole. So let's open up this for all panelists. Addressing neurodiversity and other types of disability, a recurring theme. Actually, sorry, before I say that, there's one other point I wanted to mention. What's also interesting in what you mentioned, Jessica, is the fact since COVID, we've seen an increase in complaints. I think that's, again, another sign of canaries in the coal mine, let's say, from our earlier discussion, for businesses to take really serious concern that there's a huge increase in complaints coming to CRPD, potentially leading into court cases and legal obligations towards businesses for not being inclusive. So that's another particular point that we really need to highlight. So coming back to the question, addressing neurodiversity and other types of disability, recurring theme from the focus groups, which is an unfortunate prevalent in our community, revolves around employers, managers, and colleagues emphasizing the disability rather than recognizing the individual's ability. This often leads to neurodivergent individuals being denied accommodations and masking their conditions, which contributes to their ability to perform and leads into mental health challenges. I'm eager to hear your insights on these issues. What are your thoughts, and how are we going to collectively address and rectify these challenges in the workplace? So let's start with you, Gertrude, from a mental health perspective.
Okay, so one issue is the invisible disabilities. Many years ago, I researched this for one of my dissertations. And it was very interesting to see that people were more accepted more people with a visibility they could see, or something which made the disability more real. When the disability was not so evident, people sort of tended to say, is it true, is it not? So the hidden disabilities have a big problem there, because what we don't see, we don't know. Also, there is an element of lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. If I have never experienced what it means to have access problems, because I've always been lucky to be able to go up a flight of stairs, I might not be sympathetic enough for somebody who finds it difficult to walk or to go up a number of stairs. So the lack of knowledge and lack of awareness tends to put people at a disadvantage of understanding the other person's perspective. Now, there are two ways of how people react in such situations. One could be sympathetic, understanding, and they learn to live with the person who has difficulties. And the other one could be judgmental or even abusive. As we mentioned earlier, they tend to maybe be aggressive or underestimate that the other person is really having problems. So all this is very complex. And the only way I see a way out for our society is by we have to keep teaching, we have to keep learning, we have to understand that we are different, luckily, and that is a way why our society can be enriched when we understand each other and make accommodations for each other. I think that's my view at this point.
That's a fantastic point of view, and it actually relates to a lot of the work that I've been doing for the last 3 years, where I go into business and speak about that we tend to judge them based on what we can see versus what we can't see. And this leads into a lot of misunderstandings, as you highlighted. So let's go to you, Jackie, now from an HR perspective, because Gertrude has really highlighted that particular challenge.
I very, very, very much agree that it's much more difficult to address the invisible. You know, I see someone, they look exactly like me. I expect them to be having the internal processes that I'm having and having the same ease or difficulties that I'm having. So I think for many people, it's very difficult to come to terms with this, to be empathic, to create enabling workplaces. And I think, unfortunately, in Malta, we don't have a lot of education and access, you know, and I think there is a great need for NGOs, government bodies, businesses, and maybe business, you know, sort of employer bodies to work together to create more knowledge and to possibly create programs where employers are enabled to create a better environment for people with visible or invisible disabilities. I know there are ones that exist, but there are a lot of difficulties, and I think more knowledge is needed, more collaboration is needed. I think when we look at the invisible ones, we can look around us, and I think maybe Joseph, someone like you would know more the proportion of people, for instance, neurodivergencies already existing in our workplaces. So neurodivergence is amongst us. How much better would it be if we knew how to deal with it better and how to create an enabling environment for neurodivergence, which I feel is lacking in Malta.
Hugely lacking. And so let's segue this to you, Jessica, then, from the CRPD perspective, because you mentioned the training and the, frankly, what the responsibility of CRPD is in regards to protecting people with disabilities. So based on that question and coming from what both Gertrude and Jackie has said, what's your perspective?
I think that raising awareness is of utmost importance in this, and that especially when it comes to invisible disabilities, we need to have a work environment which makes the person feel accepted, because something that we see a lot is that we feel that, okay, we do have our database of, for example, persons with disability, but a lot of people, especially people with hidden and invisible disabilities, do not approach us. They do not, because they are scared of being labeled and tabooed with a disability. So I think that first we have to create a space where a person feels accepted and feels like, listen, it's okay to kind of disclose your disability, because, you know, the company can only help you. And even if you disclose your disability, they will then also help with reasonable accommodation, which will only benefit you and also your family, because there can be the, you know, family-friendly measures and work-life balance initiatives, which we promote a lot. So I think that the employer needs to, when they are employing someone, I think it's of utmost importance that they make them feel in a safe and secure environment. So like that, a person would then just eventually disclose their needs. Obviously, this is something which doesn't happen from today to tomorrow, because even a person, it takes time for that person to get the courage to say that, listen, I have an invisible disability. And also, it is hard to kind of accept the support that you need. So I think that is very important that we create a safe environment, but then it's also important to raise awareness among employees about invisible and hidden disabilities, because today, and also not just that, but also acquired disability, that, you know, you might have an accident and end up with disability. So you have to kind of raise awareness about this. So I think those are the main important points.
Those are all fantastic points. And again, it just comes back to education, awareness, and providing the proper supports within organizations, because in the end, it's a huge lack of support and a huge lack of resources that we're seeing that even employers and managers and human resources have in the need to better support neurodivergence and people with disabilities. So I want to be really respectful for everyone's time here, and we're only down to the last 3 questions here. So one of the pivotal findings from the study that captured my attention and demanded a closer look is a staggering 69% of participants who experienced bullying attributed to work-related reasons. This raises an intriguing question. What percentage of that 69 comprises of neurodivergent individuals? Considering that neurodivergents are often associated, as we discussed earlier, with invisible disabilities, it is worth acknowledging the prevalence of masking within the community. Now I pose a question to the panel. How can we better understand and address specific challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals within the workplace, especially considering the potential overlap with the reported work-related bullying? And let's start with you, Aaron.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question and also tie it with the discussion that we were having before. So unfortunately, the study didn't go as deep as to distinguish between the different kinds of disabilities. So within various questions, we were taking record of the persons that were answering those questions, whether they were persons with disabilities, so certain statistics can come out. But then we didn't go into the type of disability. And for sure, there are a good number of those persons answering the survey that were obviously are people who have hidden disabilities. Having said that, some comments came out from the second part of the study, which was the qualitative part, where we had a number of focus groups and one specifically on disabilities. However, to answer your question and also address what was being said before, I think looking at it in a wider sense, I think it's the key word is tolerance. How tolerant are we? And when you talk about tolerance, then you realize you're not only talking about groups like persons with disability, but various other kinds of people. For example, we see a lot of bullying taking place because of racism and even the understanding of different religions, different cultures. We know that a huge part of the Maltese workforce is now not Maltese. The workers who are part of the Maltese workforce aren't Maltese. So they bring with them different religions, different culture, different skin color, different accents. And we notice that this is another area because of intolerance or lack of understanding, lack of appreciation of each other, let's say, that it gives rise to a lot of bullying. So again, it could be a vulnerable group. Sometimes the different genders don't understand each other. So if you have a particular industry where it is dominated by one gender, then obviously the other side is at a minority, and also there's also the risk of it falling victim to bullying. There are various other ways. I always say that because of all the different cases that we hear, you can have bullying about anything. It could be about body shape, could be about size. You could be too big, too small, too tall, too short. You know, if someone wants to bully you and you stick out because of some particular difference, it could be the way you walk, could be the way you talk. It could be because you're more English speaking or more Maltese speaking. And we see bullying across both sides. You could go to an English speaking school and you would prefer speaking Maltese and be bullied. And the inverse can happen as well. So it really depends on the imbalance of power, if you're thinking about it again.
Yeah.
When you're put in a particular position, are you the weaker party or the stronger party? And if you are the weaker party, then there is fuel for there to be bullying, unfortunately.
And then that leads into as well is in the way you think and behave, which is particularly, from a neurodivergent perspective or person with disability, we think and behave differently than the standard normal. So Jessica, let's segue to you and your response to the question.
Yes. As I agree completely with Aaron. When it comes to understanding the challenges that a neurodivergent individual faces in the workplace, I think there's a no one-size-fits-all approach. So everyone needs to be listened to, and the reasonable accommodations which help me doesn't mean they're going to help someone else. So I think that that is of crucial importance, and a neurodivergent individual needs to feel accepted. I think that is the biggest challenge that they face, and therefore they need to be kind of in an environment where they feel safe and secured.
So let's segue to both you, Jackie, and Gertrude for this question, because what I'm hearing is something, again, that I quite often talk about, which is creating a more people-centric approach within the business. And how can companies still maintain a culture, but at the same time put a more people-centric approach, particularly for those who are neurodivergent and people with disabilities?
Gertrude, do you want to go?
It's fine with me. Because in fact, I am aware of a study which studied chronic conditions at the workplace. And this study made a lot of recommendations for how employees can be accommodated. And one recommendation was the importance of having job coaches or a mentor at the workplace. And it might not be an ongoing thing, but especially when you have new employees, it might be very helpful when you have people with certain difficulties, both for the person to be assisted to integrate in a new place, but also for the other colleagues and for the employer to accommodate and to make timely changes if necessary, and also to understand that sometimes tweaking a bit a roster or arranging a workplace is not only beneficial for the new employee which might have difficulties, but it could also be a positive thing for the other employees, such as job shadowing, sharing, understanding the differences. And it was also indicated that it could be an opportunity for other employees who might never have disclosed that they experience certain difficulties to adapt better to the workplace, and also to reorganize the workplace to make it more productive, more positive. As Jackie was mentioning earlier, the positive employees tend to attract and retain their employees better. So basically, these are what comes to mind when faced with this question of making the workplace a better place for people who are different. Aren't we all different?
Jackie?
I don't have very much more to add to all the very valid stuff that my three colleagues here have talked about. I think we have to keep trying, you know. I think like has been said, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. That's for people who are neurotypical. You know, I mean, you can see it, you know, in the school environment, and in the work environment. Some people just fit in and others don't. And I think it's become such a huge percentage of people who are saying, and when you see it for Gen Zers, you know, they don't want to fit in anymore. They don't want to fit in. They're not that interested in fitting in. My kids are in that bracket, you know, they look at me like I'm crazy, you know, sometimes. and I think it's a positive thing that we're learning that everybody, not only people who are not neurotypical, not only people who don't have disabilities, you know, everybody wants their own way. And I think it's a positive way forward if we can look at, you know, differences and be able to embrace them and deal with them well. So
Fantastic. And you know, it's Gertrude, what you said earlier is music to my ears, because that's one of the things that I talk about in my public speaking and workshops is the importance of having coaches and mentors within the organization, particularly because it's a great accommodation for someone who's neurodivergent or with people with disabilities. So let's move on. Previously, we delved into the economic costs of businesses, but there's another facet to the issue, the economic costs towards the bullied employee. This aspect was a point of internal discussion within our committee before the report's publication. How do you think we should address and mitigate the economic impact on employees who have been subjected to bullying in the workplace, particularly when we take a look at the focus group, where we've seen people with disabilities who've been bullied? Instead of the employer fixing the bullying situation and creating psychologically safe workplaces, they just, in avoiding legal obligations, they rather just pay off the employee and have them go away. How do we mitigate that?
Maybe I can
go ahead,
I can
Aaron.
Kick this off
because everybody's gone silent.
Yes. Look, I would say it's very difficult to answer this question without connecting it to the other facets. I think it's all connected. So the health, the social, the economic, it's all connected. So the way you tackle it is you have to tackle it at a high level of fighting bullying, of raising awareness within the organization generally, because then it just trickles down. So I don't think you can specifically target the economic effects which the bullied person feels without tackling the other parts. And when we talk about the economic effects, you're talking about doctors' fees. You're talking about being left behind in terms of promotions, or moving on to working on certain exciting projects, which gives you certain job satisfaction. Not doing overtime because you're sick, so you can't do more hours, or because you're so exhausted that you cannot, you cannot put up the extra hours and you need money because you need to do something else. But because you are bullied, you don't have the energy, you don't have the mental energy, or you don't have the physical energy. And there are physical and mental effects of bullying. So we were surprised to hear how many people have stomach issues, for example, because of the tension and stress. Then it develops into something actually physical, not simply something which you feel mentally exhausted. So there are all these things which lead you to even if you're, let's say you're going to your lawyer to check what legal rights you have in this particular case of abuse that you're suffering from at work. That's also an expense. So it is an expense because before I spoke quite extensively on the expense on the company or the employer. But there is also an economic effect, as you quite rightly say, on the employee. But I think the way you tackle it is not necessarily different from how you tackle the other aspects. Of course, I'm talking about before, right? The before is in terms of instilling an anti-bullying culture, having training, raising awareness, having a policy, and setting up structures. The after is, of course, having appropriate and effective systems in place. So if you go to HR, and unfortunately we hear this very often, people now are afraid sometimes to go to HR or to management, and this is, of course, something which I say which came out from the study. Okay, I'm not generalizing, because I know there are many employers out there who genuinely care about the well-being of their team. You get members of management then going to the other person and divulging the confidential conversation that the person reporting made. So then that really attacks the confidence, the trust relationship there is between management and employee. And when we are actually giving out workshops on anti-bullying at bBrave, we always emphasize this. The element of trust must not be broken. So both sides have responsibilities, both the employee and both the employer have responsibilities, because it will not work unless both sides cooperate. Because many times as well, the employees don't cooperate because they don't help by reporting. They don't give facts. So if someone reports and there were 6 witnesses in the room and none of them can remember what happened, okay, can you believe that? Okay, then what can the employer do? It's only one person's word against the other, and the others are not corroborating a particular version. So there is only so much unless there is CCTV and there is other evidence of what's happening. So yes, I would say tackle the economic effects by adopting a holistic approach.
I like what you said there, elements of trust. And I think that's a huge, crucial aspect and a key thing that you pointed out there. So I want to wrap this up by asking these last two questions. And again, being respectful of the time because we've gone a little bit over. So one of the things I really want to point out from the study, when we talk about the medical and the physical contributions or physical effects, should I say, is that there are two critical aspects, and I'm eager to address this with all of you here. The impact of workplace bullying, particularly in relation to cardiovascular illness and societal repercussions. And let me break that down to you. During one of our focus groups, the discussion unveiled an alarming connection between workplace bullying, self-harm, and the tragic story of an employee taking their life due to being bullied. In 2018, a report from North America's findings indicate that workplace bullying contributes to an increased risk of heart attacks. So consider both of these aspects. In two separate Canadian case studies, emerged, both linking to workplace bullying, resulting in one employee's death from a heart attack and another one taking their own life. Both instances, this is the unique aspect of it, occurred outside of work. And the courts found the employers implicit as being the cause of death outside of work and found them legally responsible, despite it happening outside of work versus in work. So how can we address and prevent such severe consequences of workplace bullying, both from the individual affected and the broader societal implications? Gertrude, let's start with you.
So I think what Aaron mentioned earlier, the workplace bullying policy.
Yeah.
And I know that there are many organizations who have even a mental health policy in place, are two tools which can be there for both employee and both the employer. And I'm sure if employers understand the value of investing in such policies, would not think twice of having these tools in place for them and for the employees. As well, I know that there are various companies who offer psychological support anonymously. So it is also important to make employees aware of what is available and that they can access these services. So it is not, I think, one thing, but there are various things which need to be in place, because I'm sure that no employer is happy when an employee commits suicide or has serious health problems because of the workplace.
Fantastic. And segueing from that to you, Aaron and Jackie, considering the legal implications, particularly, we haven't seen it in Malta yet, but we do have a precedence of companies being found guilty and responsible despite these occurrences happening outside of work as a result of what happened in the workplace.
I can just quickly move on from what Gertrude said, to have a policy, to implement that policy properly with proper disciplinary procedures and understanding how things can be tackled, and a culture of trust. The employee assistance programs, so for people to get help outside the organization. I think these are the main. I mean, it is a legal requirement in Malta also to have a harassment policy in place. So, if a company does not have that, they can be construed as having a hostile workplace, so that is very important for companies to implement. And a policy is one thing, it's a piece of paper, but to implement it properly is the most important thing. So I think maybe
Aaron,
we can finish up with you.
I would say legally, there has to be a proven link. So between the company's behavior or omission when it had obligations, to do otherwise, and the resulting damage. So legally, that's how we consider it. So there has to be a link. Now, in cases of bullying, admittedly, that proving that link might be very difficult.
Yes.
But there are cases such as the examples which you gave from the Canadian court cases where the courts had actually established that there was a direct link between the bullying at the workplace and the resulting, I think you mentioned, heart attack, and I believe a suicide in these two cases. So really and truly, employers need to be aware of their responsibilities. And I think even from the human point of view, right? We don't need the law to tell us that we need to be kind and to be, to be mindful of people's feelings. And we don't, I'm not saying we should be treading on eggshells as we are operating, because businesses and employers need to operate and they have a lot of responsibilities, a lot on their mind, not only anti-bullying and mental health and many other issues, but I think these important aspects should not be overlooked either.
Just very quickly, Aaron, in regards to documenting, can you give us very quickly 2 or 3 suggestions for those who are listening on what they need to do to document the situation of them being bullied?
I'll take that slightly wider. I'll give 3 tips to people who are being bullied at the workplace. So firstly, I'd say know your rights. So know what is acceptable and not acceptable. Larger companies and organizations have manuals and policies and codes. Be aware, have a copy of them so you know where your rights start and end. Secondly is keep records. So coming to your point, keep records. Now, sometimes you don't have an email or you don't have a video or a picture, but keep notes, because certain dates and times might prove helpful. So if something happened today which has been particularly upsetting, keep a note of it. Who was in the room? What time did that happen? Because you might not report it the first time because it was a one-off. The second and the third time it happens, you will not go to HR and say, this just happened. You will say, this is the 3rd time it happened. And when you come to give details about what happened the first and the second time, which might have been a month ago, might have been 6 months ago, you will not remember the details, and you will find that that was very unhelpful. So keep records. The third one is take appropriate action. Again, there is no magic formula. I'm fully appreciative of how complex certain bullying cases can be, and they are many times very difficult to resolve. So take appropriate action. We're not only talking about legal action or discussing it with HR and the company. Take care of your mental health. Sometimes that is far more important than all the legal action you can take against your employer or any fellow colleagues. Your mental health, take care of that, and do not be shy. We know that it's a very high percentage of the working population and of the population that suffers from mental health issues. So if you feel that your heart is beating really fast, you're having negative thoughts, you've even thought of hurting yourself, you're feeling helpless, do not be shy of reaching out for help. We have the National Mental Helpline. Gertrude will correct me if I got it wrong. It's 1579, correct? And there are professionals there 24/7 that are ready to help you. So know your rights, keep records, and take the appropriate action, be it legal, protecting your mental health. Sometimes it's changing your job. Was it your fault? It wasn't your fault, but what is really important for you? I would not discount that option either.
Fantastic. And just to repeat that number, it's 179.
1579.
1579.
So 179 is the national emergency line, but 1579 is the national mental health line.
Fantastic. 1579. All right. Aaron, you've mentioned 2 particular points. Mental health, protecting your mental health, and if possible, leaving the workplace. So this leads me into my last and final question, and I promise it's my last and final question. And it's a shame that Jessica had to leave, but I understand due to her timing and appointment. So my last and final question. Now, I haven't thrown. Actually, I did throw a curveball earlier. So, but with that said, this is a sink or swim question. A few years ago, Gary Vee had a series called Ask Gary Vee. In one episode, he and his guests tackled the question, as an employee, how do I change company culture? Their consensus was that this is nearly impossible unless you have the ear of the employer. And they both emphasized that if the company doesn't align with your values, it's best to move on. To make this more relatable, let me share a quick story with you. I did a workshop with Christine Furman in introducing neurodiversity and dyslexia. And during that workshop, we had one of the participants who was a recruiter who came specifically to gain more knowledge because she had a horrible story. That horrible story was the fact that she had a candidate who submitted to company A. Somebody from company A did their due diligence and knew somebody from the previous employer, company B. They asked about this candidate, and they obviously gave some information, but the particular information they gave is that this person's autistic. Company A came back to the recruiter and asked, is this person autistic? The recruiter didn't know how to answer because they may not have known, and they basically turned around and said, well, if we'd like to have this person removed from the list because we won't be interviewing them because of their autism. So this leads into a number of things: discrimination, the fact that both workplaces were not psychologically safe, potential bullying happening from the previous workplace, and also the most disgusting thing is that they took away that person's right to choose to disclose or not to disclose. So now comes the question that I pose to all four of you. While leaving might be a feasible solution for those with strong character who aren't neurodivergent or disabled, for those who have been bullied or are neurodivergent disabled, leaving is not always an option. And if they were to leave, where would they go? How can we support individuals in these situations and work towards creating environments where they don't have to choose between enduring mistreatment and leaving their professional aspirations behind? Jackie, how about we start with you?
I think if I had the answer, I'd be very rich. Let's put it that way. I think there isn't an answer to such a horrible situation. You know, I mean, one of the things you didn't mention is data protection. You know, I'm a recruiter myself. In the past, we all used to do it. Malta, everyone knows everyone. Hello, you know, this is 25 years ago. We don't do this stuff anymore. You can't do it. You can't do it, you know. And it's a case of abuse. And I feel very reluctant to respond to such a question without knowing more detail. I mean, when you first started talking, the quick answer that jumped into my head was, you can change culture by giving feedback when you're asked, to speaking to your colleagues and saying, okay, if a questionnaire comes out, we're all going to say this and we're all going to respond, you know, and asking, for instance, your HR department to make questionnaires anonymous. I hate anonymity, don't get me wrong. I feel that we should all be in this lovely ideal world where we can all speak up and we can all say what we feel. It's not always possible. So, you know, responding to questionnaires, responding if you're invited to take part in focus groups, you know, speaking up and really giving your feedback. And at least I know that from my company, we really take notes of what people say. They might not see the response there and then within a month, 2 months, a year, but change happens slowly. And you know, we really do take note of what our employees say. We take a long time to train them and we want people to stay. So we want them to be happy. So yes, and we have neurodivergent people amongst us. And if we were more able to accommodate, I think we'd all be happier because we'd get more out of people. People would be happier. So yes, a lot of things that would happen in an ideal world. And let's work together to try and create that. That's the only thing I can say.
Well, thank you for that. Gertrude, let's get your thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, it's again, like Jackie said, it is a very tough question. I mean, just discriminating against people because somebody told you that they have a label is beyond my imagination. You know, like, I mean, as if being labeled as normal, thank God we're not all the same. So I think I wouldn't want to work in a place like that. I mean, okay, there are the issues of unemployment and all the repercussions, but I'd rather take a bit more time and find a better workplace than go and work with these people. but without judging them. As we mentioned earlier, there's the fear of unknown, the lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, pigeonholing. We try to put people in the different pigeonholes because we think that's how they want to be treated without asking them, without communicating. So there is a lot of things which are going on when you are employing someone, when you are employing someone new. But that is why we now have various legislation which safeguards people, as we mentioned, like the harassment policies. There is like the Mental Health Act, which safeguards against people discriminated because of their mental health issues. There is CRPD, which I know is very proactive at safeguarding the rights of people with disability. So it is very important that we make people know of their rights and of their responsibilities.
Well, yeah, that's what both of you have said is very, very important and crucial. I think the most important thing is, is that not everybody has the option of leaving, despite they're trying to protect their mental health. And the aspect if they were to leave, where do they go? Because if company B didn't want them, now company A doesn't want them, is company C going to want them, or company D, and so forth and so forth? Where do they go? Particularly if you're neurodivergent or someone with disability. So Aaron, let's get you to wrap this up with your response.
No, I definitely agree that particularly for persons with certain vulnerabilities or differences, it might be more difficult to change job, because even people who don't have disabilities find it very hard to change job. It's, it can be life-changing. So admittedly, of course, it can be very difficult, and sometimes you don't see an option, right? So one has to look at internal solutions, and usually one looks at the internal solutions. I was talking previously when those internal solutions are not effective and it's affecting your mental health so much that you shouldn't not consider leaving, when sometimes that is the best thing for you. But some people say, look, what's happening is unfair, it's illegal, it's incorrect, I'm right, so I shouldn't be the one to leave. And I sympathize with that sentiment, but sometimes for you that is the right, sometimes, not always, right? So internal solutions could be obviously having the right work culture. Not all management and HR are out to get you. There are some people who genuinely want, and it is in their interest, it's in their social well-being, and it's in their economic interest to make sure that there is harmony at the workplace. So many cases are resolved within the company. So if you have a serious management structure, HR, hopefully reporting will see an effective follow-ups and cases being resolved within. There are other solutions if that doesn't work. Some places are unionized. You can go to your unions. They can give you a lot of advice about your rights, about your employment rights. Unions hire lawyers as well, so you can get your legal advice from your own union. So again, there are solutions. Some people decide to hire their own lawyer if they want to obviously take legal action, even court action in some cases where things get serious. And of course, there are the authorities. So if we're talking about discriminations or other forms of abuse because of disabilities, there's CRPD. If you're talking about discrimination, lack of equality, harassment, there is NCPE. If it is something which is working against your personal health at the workplace, there is OHSA as well. If the abuse takes the shape of a crime, there is the police that you can report to. So there are various, obviously that is why I hesitate to say there is no magic formula, and cases can be very complicated. Most of the cases we see require multiple solutions, internal solutions, reporting here, reporting there, mental health support. So we should not only look at one, there's no one answer usually. There's multiple things that one needs to do. I would really encourage.
I can mention quickly,
Sure.
Yes.
Is that it's also very useful for employers and management for people with these kind of challenges to know themselves and to understand what they can ask for. So sometimes if someone doesn't know themselves, or they refuse to face the issues or get a diagnosis or anything like this, then it's very difficult to be able to help. Because if you offer help and say, okay, we're willing to help you, what can we do? And there's no information forthcoming, then there's a stalemate, you know. So it's, you know, I think in every situation, it's important for both parties to be working together for a solution, you know. So yes, you need to expect people around you to support you, but you also need to support yourself and show them how to support you. And we know this, that with neurodivergence, as people grow up and mature, they learn strategies to be able to deal with their situation. So yes, be open about those strategies, and yes, ask for the help you need, you know.
What I would say to that, and I agree with everything you said there, and thank you, Aaron, as well, is that one, we need to ensure that the workplace is psychologically safe,
Yes,
where people
yes,
feel
yes,
open to
very
have that
safe.
conversation. And two, you know, managers and employers need to have that additional training to be able to know how to
Yes,
support that
yes.
individual and have the resources to be able to do that. Otherwise, then it's great to say, how can we help you? And then the person's afraid, saying, you know, well, we really don't know how to help me because you lack the awareness and you don't have the resources. So there's that caveat to take into consideration. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground. You guys have been absolutely gracious with your time. And I know that there was some technical issues that we got resolved midway through or quarter into the live webinar. But that's all sorted, and we now have that extra time to hopefully make up for that, plus the recording. So as we wrap up this enlightening conversation, I extend my heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists for their valuable insight and for shedding light on the significance of the study. It's crucial that we continue to bring these issues to the forefront of the public and business awareness. Listeners, I strongly encourage you to delve into the study's findings. If you or someone you know is in need of support, please reach out to the bBrave, as well as 1579 for the mental health that the mental health provides. And ask for guidance and implementation of the anti-bullying measures that bBrave offers, and consider the invaluable resources and expertise offered by bBrave. Together, let's foster a workplace that prioritizes respect, inclusion, and well-being. And lastly, I would like to take this moment to inform our listeners about Neurodiversity Week. This is the 6th annual year, scheduled to take place from the 18th to the 22nd. During that week, I am happy to announce that I'll be bringing Neurodiversity Week Malta, where I will be conducting a series of LinkedIn Live interviews with key figures internationally and locally to discuss how to create more inclusive environments in the workplace and why neurodiversity is beneficial for businesses. Visit my page for more details, and I will post the event in the comments as well. Thank you very much, everyone, and I wish you a good Thursday evening, should I say.